I'm here to tell you your self-publishing project may not be a zine. First, I want to talk about, before I get into Zine Quest, I want to talk about my experiences with zines. So in probably 1988 or 1989, I was at a punk rock show at the River Rock Cafe in Buffalo, New York. And I was standing outside between bands, and some kid walks up, and he had a backpack on his back, and he's going around to groups of people and saying, "Hey, do you want to buy my zine?" Now, I don't have that exact zine, but I do have zines that look like that. And this zine that I'm holding up had hard contrast. It was a photocopy cover. It was actually, instead of being saddle stitched or stapled along the binding, it instead had the staples here in order to be able to staple 8.5 by 11 sheets together into a large format like this. The point that I'm getting at with this story is that it allowed a 15-year-old kid to be able to have a voice in a world where glossy magazines were already the norm. I know I would go to the store and buy Thrasher or Thrasher, the skateboarding magazine, or Thrash Metal magazine, or Kerrang, in order to keep up on what was going on with metal and punk. But within the DIY punk community, where bands were making their own records and their own tapes and playing these tiny shows, often in VFW halls and what have you, you had this whole culture where kids would steal photocopies from their parents' work, or they would go to the local copy shop and run off a bunch of copies of a zine. Often they were typed on a typewriter. I remember a friend of mine who did Mindless Mutant zine in the 2000s, the mid-2000s, had the idea that he was going to see what it was like to do a zine using a typewriter, which is also how Gary Gygax used to do his old newsletters. He decided to type everything on a typewriter, and he only did like a 2-page spread, and he said it was an absolute nightmare. Obviously, word processing has made things a lot easier, and now we have a world where photocopiers can do color photocopies, and it's a whole new world of possibilities for self-publishing. But there are some things that are kind of like a core element to making a zine, and they are there because of the fact that it creates a level of accessibility. The reason why that 14 or 15-year-old kid was able to walk up to people and sell his zine out of his backpack was because of the fact that he had access to his brain, ideas, and the ability to put those ideas onto paper with a typewriter or with a marker, and then was able to mass produce these with a photocopier somewhere and then sell them for $1 each at a show. And I think that's a magical thing. So I wanted to, in that what is a zine, I wanted to read the definition off of Wikipedia. A zine is a small circulation, self-published work of original or appropriated texts and images, usually reproduced via a copy machine. Zines are the product of either a single person or a small group and are popularly photocopied into physical prints for circulation. Once again, reinforcing these ideas that every self-publishing project is not a zine. A zine is traditionally something that is made on a photocopier and is really a small press project. So for example, I've got some RPG zines here that are of different levels. So I do believe in one of the Goodman Games presentations that we did on self-publishing, Bob Brinkman said that he actually makes these on his printer at home. So whenever somebody orders a copy of Skull and Crossbones Classics, he just runs off all the sheets on his printer at home and then staples them and sends them out. This particular Hunters in Death zine, which was from Zine Quest last year, it was one of the ones that I backed. It is just a straight up photocopy zine, black and white art, black and white interior. The thing that made this zine extra cool, but still within the idea of ZineQuest, is that it's actually on resume paper. So it's on the cover is on resume paper. So in order to upgrade it, rather than going like full color, glued bindings, yada yada, the upgrade was to put it on like a nice resume paper. So as far as the layouts, Hunters in Death, has a nice layout that was done using probably some sort of word processing program. Oops, trying to get in the center. Some sort of word processing program, but fancier, like design program like Adobe InDesign or something like that. A lot of people I've noticed on the zine RPG zines use Affinity. I'm not familiar with the product, but it's one of the things that people use. So this zine, Tooth Chipper, this is a zine that I did a few years ago. It is for a miniature war game called Wild in the Streets. And all of the interior and layouts was actually done using Google Docs. I did all the typing in Google Docs and then went to my copy shop and sat in front of the copy machine, and I switched things from positive to negative in order to reverse out the black and white, and I cut things out into the shapes of the blocks of text that I wanted. I used photos of miniatures for the backgrounds, or I actually took old records and things and used those for textures for the backgrounds and appropriated images. So going back to the idea of what a zine is, where all of the work isn't necessarily your own, and that's okay. All of the borders that I used on this text are all drawn with a ballpoint pen and reversed out. Long story short, you can do a lot of amazing artistic things, or things that have a cool aesthetic, without getting all mired in learning how to use InDesign. I'm not disparaging learning those things. I'm actually, for Wide-Eyed Terror zine that I'm doing for Zine Quest 3, I am teaching myself InDesign. But at the same time, that's to push my abilities. But something like this is just as good, and in certain ways is kind of better, in my opinion. Just because of the fact that each page, instead of being, the popularity of a game like Morkborg is because of the fact that each page is a piece of art. It has a really unique aesthetic that is taken from punk and metal zine culture. So that sort of thing I think is really important. There are all sorts of other zines that have differing levels. Like this is Deathblow. Very simple. The interiors are very simple. It uses the same image like 20 times throughout the zine, and that's fine. It looks cool. Whereas, A Pound of Flesh from Tuesday Night Games, it has a really nice aesthetic. It's clearly done by somebody who is, adept at graphic design, but that doesn't have to be you. This type of thing is meant to be accessible to everyone, not just the people who know how to use InDesign. And so, finally, I want to talk about Tales of the Smoking Wyrm. Tales of the Smoking Wyrm, once again, it is on a nice textured paper, similar to like resume paper. In fact, I could see somebody doing a resume, even though this is more of a cardstock. I could see somebody fancy, probably business card. But additionally, Tales of the Smoking Wyrm, they got creative, and we've got this page that folds out. Hey, how do I do that on my own? You use a larger sheet of paper for that particular spread, and you staple it in. There are all sorts of, now he obviously had these were not hand assembled by Trevor and Blind Visionary publications. But the point is that you can do lots of creative and interesting things. When you get into looking at people who do zines or they're part of zine culture, there's actually zine-specific makerspaces all around the country. There's a zine library in Chicago, in my old neighborhood in Chicago. And it was a really cool place to go. And I ended up going and watching a thing on how to bind zines yourself using, instead of staples, but using glue or other techniques. But the long and short of it is, as we go into Zine Quest, and I want to talk about Zine Quest really quick as well. So Zine Quest is a fantastic initiative that Kickstarter created 3 years ago. And the idea was to participate, launch a 2-week project for a single color, unbound, folded, stapled, or saddle-stitched RPG zine on A5 or smaller paper. So what that means is these half-size zines are all, following that idea. Hey, single color, unbound, and the single color is one color on top of black. So if you have white, black, and a color, that falls in the constraints of what Zine Quest is supposed to be. And why do those rules exist? What is it about? It's about that accessibility that I talked about at the very beginning. That 15-year-old kid selling his zine out of his backpack at the punk rock show at the River Rock Cafe. That is exactly what Zine Quest is trying to capture with this sort of thing. But obviously, instead of with a music zine, it is being captured for RPGs. Now, I do want to talk about, where things have gone wrong. And I'm going to talk about where things have gone wrong utilizing one of my most prized possessions in my gaming book collection, The Tomb of Black Sand by Jacob Hurst. This zine was something that I backed as part of Zine Quest 1. And as you can see, based upon the constraints that are set by Zine Quest and what a zine is by definition through what we see on Wikipedia, The Tomb of Black Sand is not a zine. It is hardbound. It is I don't know how many copies of this are in print, but it is not like 100 copies or 200 copies that are being, sold. You can buy it in stores. Is what I'm getting at, and not just like the cool indie store that has a couple of zines, local zines on the shelf. This is a product that was made for mass consumption, and it is gorgeous. It is everything that I would strive to achieve in a professional product. But if you are going into Zine Quest with the expectation that you are going to make and sell something like this, that is your goal, I think you're missing the point, because this is about accessibility and being able to get all of these people's creative ideas out into the world without having all of that knowledge and all of the resources to do something like that. So yeah, I'm gonna look really quick to see if there was anything that I missed. So what is a zine? What is Zine Quest? Yes, every self-publishing project is not a zine. And you just need to keep that in mind. So when you're building your project page and you're trying to think about should I be doing full color in order to draw people in? It's better marketing. Should I be making a Kickstarter video in order to all of those things teach you valuable skills. And so I'm not disparaging people trying to broaden their skill set. I'm not disparaging people wanting to make something gorgeous, something that will, As I said, this is a prized possession in my collection, but it's not a zine. Every self-publishing project is not a zine. And so just keep that in mind. I want to see all of people's fantastic creations. I'm really excited for ZineQuest 3. I hope you're excited for ZineQuest 3 too. I know that I've got a couple of projects that I'm going to be publishing through ZineQuest 3. But just keep in mind, set those expectations and those standards at what the intent is supposed to be instead of shooting for the sky. Because really, if we want this to be an accessible hobby and an accessible thing for anybody to be able to do, like that 15-year-old kid that I keep talking about that was selling their zine out of their backpack in Buffalo, New York, we need to understand that we need to bring some of those expectations down, because that's what zines are all about. It's about accessibility. All right, thanks. I'm Nick from Breaker Press Games, and have a good day. Hey, I had one last thing to add. So we're in the middle of this global pandemic, and a lot of small businesses are closing. So I wanted to make a final plea to each and every one of you that are considering making a zine for ZineQuest. Print locally. I know it's a simple thing, something that for a lot of people, especially because of all the recommendations that you get on the internet, because a lot of people use bigger companies that do zines for a lot of people. Don't forget that a mile down the road, probably, you have a perfectly adequate printer that does amazing work, that you just haven't done the research to find out about. Rabid Dog zine that I did last year, or last ZineQuest, Tooth Chipper that I showed earlier in the video, these zines were printed at my local printer. And the only way that in this global pandemic that your local businesses are going to stay afloat is if you support them. So don't, automatically go with the big name that you hear everybody talking about. Yes, your town may only have a FedEx Kinko's. I understand if you don't want to go to FedEx Kinko's. That's fine. But please consider your local printer. Definitely, if you're making a zine, it's a zine. You do not need to print in China. It's a zine. Go a mile down the road. All right, thanks. Bye.